Today we are doing a little video to show you how to put together a Diamond Professional, which is a table that we started the company with 30 years ago. And it's gone through quite a few modifications and improvements over the years. But the original table had metal feet, and the pedestal has inserts in it. You're going to drop that into the pedestal and put screws through there to hold it in place. And then you have this machined all thread that threads into that, sort of like this. And you want to start out with it in there pretty far because you want the table sitting as low as you can to start with before you start leveling it, because floors are very uneven, and you want to leave the lowest leg as low as it'll go and raise the other ones up to that leg. Now this piece just drops into the foot, and you can see this, how it's notched right here. Okay, this foot has an Allen screw. That's a set screw, and you drop this down in here, and then you take an Allen wrench, and then you tighten it up, and now it's not going to go anyplace. So if you were to pick the table up, the feet would go up and down with the table. Now when you go to level the frame of the table, then you loosen these set screws, and that allows this thing to turn freely and the foot stays stationary, because like here the floor is carpeting, this is sitting down the carpeting, there's a lot of friction, this does not want to spin very easily, so we loosen a set screw in order to level the table. So now we're going to put all these inserts into the bottom of the pedestals, and then drop the feet on there and put the set screws in, and then we'll flip over the pedestals and start assembling the frame. Now this insert right here, when the pedestal's flipped over, there's a hole that's drilled through it, and we're going to put a steel rod through there so we can adjust it. And so when you turn this down, you have to leave this sticking up high enough that whatever rod you put through there is going to clear these. So you want to go down as low as you can and still have room to adjust it up and down a little bit, but mostly up, because normally we would start out measuring the frame of the table to see which is the highest corner, and then we're going to raise the other legs or feet so they're the same height as the highest spot of the table. But you want to make sure that you don't get this so far down in there that the metal rod is going to interfere with the bottom of the pedestal. All right, so once the feet are installed on the pedestals, then we're going to assemble the frame of the table. And in the case of a Diamond Professional, this is an engineered wood product called Timber Strand. It's very strong. There are these little ears here. They go on the outside. And then there's inserts in the pedestals, so there's 6 bolts that go here, 6 bolts that go there to hold to the pedestals. And then there's frame pieces that go on the end, and they get bolted together. And then you're ready to do the leveling system after that.
During the frame assembly, the rail bolts that hold the pedestals to the timber strand frame use a 9/16 socket, and so as you see, I use an impact driver and an extension. The extension will come in handy later. And then we started off lining up the bolts with the holes in the pedestals inserts, and now we're just going to start them all by hand. That's the idea. once all the bolts are installed into the pedestal inserts loosely, they're turning, they're started by hand. You can turn them, but they're loose so that you could put the rest of the timber strand frame together. For this part of the frame assembly, I want to take a little bit of care that each of the pieces are all form one plane. And so you can do that manually by filling the seam and see if there's any space if you need to raise or lower it. You do that at this point while we're putting these bolts in. So it's just 5 of these bolts and washers and nuts on each end. Alright, at this point I've hand started all of the fasteners for the corner of the frame. And I'm going to use the impact driver 9/16 and also a 9/16 open end wrench for the fasteners. And I'm trying to make sure that this is nice and in one plane by making sure that the one side's not higher than the other one before I actually tighten it down. And if it needs to be raised or lowered, then I do that right at this point. So let's see. There's one bolt on the top of the corner and another one on the bottom on the other side. And then, so 2 for each corner and 1 for the middle. With all 10 of the bolts attaching the frame together, remember we left the 12 of the bolts bolting the frame to the pedestals loose. And at that point, I want to make sure to try to plumb the frame together so that any movement that we made while we were trying to assemble the frame, we want to make this good and solid and plumb. So that's kind of why we did that.
Sell back in the pro amps to die. How would I Is it 2 years?
Well, at this point, we finished
There's 2 pans of like.
the assembly of the frame of the table. And this is the point where we would normally position the table as close as we can to its final resting spot, because once we set the slate on there, it's a lot harder to move because of all the extra weight. So for this part of it, I use obviously a tape measure from the walls. This room is quite large, and it had a table in this spot before, and there's hangers in the ceiling for the light. And this laser is giving me a line through the middle of the table, but it's also giving me a line on the ceiling, so that we can get it over and get it lined up so that when we hang the light, it's going to be in the right place. So, Stephen, we need to move this table this way an inch or so. Now your end needs to go that way.
I put my feet right in the things, dude. They can move those. I put the feet right in the marks.
Okay, now it's time to level the frame of the table. So for this part, I use a carpenter's level so I can make a longer measurement. And I don't want to rest the level directly on the frame, because if the frame has like a bow in it of any kind, then this could sort of teeter-totter back and forth. So I take some playing cards, so it's 3 playing cards, put them here and 3 here, playing cards are really uniform in thickness, so I'm raising both ends of the level the same amount. And now I can set the level directly on the playing cards. And now that the level is elevated above the frame of the table, and I can get a measurement from the corner to the center, and the center to the corner. And then what I do is I'll take a machinist level and set on top of that to give me an accurate reading, because the carpenter level in general is not going to be accurate enough to do this. So we're low towards this wall. About 3 lines, it's about 15 thousandths of an inch. And what I'm trying to do is just get it to where it reads the same thing with respect to the center of the table. I'm not worried about getting it level. I'm just trying to get the 4 corners so that they're the same height with each other. And that's between 15 and 20 thousandths. So definitely that end of the table needs to come up. Now we need to measure the ends. And this end is low. So now we need to adjust the feet. So for that, we need to loosen the set screws, and then we need a steel rod to go through the hole that's drilled in that insert, so I can rotate it to raise and lower the frame of the table. So I'm going to loosen the screw, the set screw, on this foot that we showed right at the beginning of the video. Loosen it.
I'm ready.
That allows that insert to spin freely, and the foot doesn't have to move at all. And then when we want to raise it, if we're looking at the foot looking from the top down, raising it is clockwise and lowering it is counterclockwise. And I need to raise this one, so I'm going to put this piece in here, and I'm just going to spin it around. Now I need to go and look at my measurement again. Okay, it started to move now. Okay, so it's right in there. Yeah, so that end is level.
Once the frame and pedestals are done and leveled, we're ready for the leveling system. Leveling system consists of different pieces. You've got 3 cross members. You have 2 ends and 1 middle piece. And when you put them on, you should notice that there's cuts for the other parts of the leveling system that we'll get to in a minute. For the professional, make sure that you're using these ones that are supported by the frame. The diamond leveling system, these cross members are cut for both professionals and pro-ams and smart tables. So if this were a 9-foot smart table, I would use other ones. But you've got 3 cross members and 6 leaf pieces, and there's 3 types of leaf pieces. You've got ends, and you've got a left side and a right side, and leveling wedges. And so the first thing, you make sure you got all your pieces, put them all on, center the center cross member on the side pocket on both sides, and move in place the other end pieces of the cross member, and go to each end making sure that it's level, centered, and then use a rubber mallet and these wooden dowel pins. They're 1/4 inch size by 1 inch, and just tap them all in with a rubber mallet. At this point, we've got the leveling system assembled, and with all 6 leaf pieces on there and 2 lengths of wood screws attaching the leveling system to the frame. We've got 2.5-inch wood screws, which are longer, and 1 1/8-inch wood screws, which are shorter. The longer ones go towards the inside of the table, and the goal is that we want to attach the leaf pieces and the cross members to the frame, but if they were put here, we don't want these to protrude through the bottom of this cleat. So the long ones inside and all the short ones outside. And it's good. Also, for the professional, we're going to use 4 leveling blocks. That's the leveling wedges that come on the wood. And we're going to install them in alternating directions, just because that's what we do. And they fit on dowel pins and then down in these inserts.
Now, time out. Okay, this leveling system is what we would call a universal leveling system. It's made for all diamond tables. And for these adjusters out in the middle of the wedges, they have to have something solid to push against so they can actually push the slate up. So on a diamond professional, you have that piece of timber strand that runs down the center of the table. So these are installed right over the top of that timber strand. On a Pro-Am, we have a ball return, and the wood for the ball return is under this section. And so the parts that's cut out right here, we would put the wedges here for a Pro-Am, and we put them in the center for a professional. And if you put them out here, they're not going to do anything. So you need to make sure that you put the center levelers to where they're installed over something solid to support them. So when you go to raise the wedge, it's pushing against something solid, so it's going to raise the slate. Otherwise, all you're going to do is push the cross member down, because the plywood is definitely a lot weaker than the slate is. So now we're ready to put all the screws in, and then when we get finished, we want to make sure all these wedges are adjusted in all the way so they're not above the surface of the wood here. So when we set the slate on there, everything is at 0. And then we'll level the slates after we get them on the table. Are you still running? Okay. The timber strand is a really dense material. So he's really bearing down hard on the drill because he's trying to keep this base so it stays flush against the timber strand when he's driving the screws in. And he's just putting the ones in around the pockets first. And then he'll go back and drop in all the rest. The short screws are really only to take this leaf piece and screw it to the crossmember down below it. The long screws hold the whole leveling system to the frame of the table. But it's really just so that the leveling system doesn't skate around on the frame.
At this point, I've got all of the leveling system wood screws, attached to the frame and everything. So make sure that all of the countersunk wood screws are down in the countersinks and below the surface of the leaf pieces. And then all these leveling wedges fit into these ramps in the leveling leaves, if you've never seen these before. And this is a 3/8 inch rod that holds them in there, and it helps to have one of these things do this quickly. So we take these all the way out so that when you put this on here, you want the leveling wedge all the way out and below the surface of the leaf piece to begin with, so that when we put the slates on there, they're not being held, they're not higher than they necessarily need to be. And then the leveling wedges are attached to the leaf pieces by 2 1/2-inch pan heads. They're wood screws, but they have a flat head and they just go up underneath. And then there's 36 of them. It's 18 leveling wedges and 2 each. And so give me a minute to finish those up. Oh, to do this well, I kind of position that little aluminum bracket and center the leveling rod in that slot. Make sure that it moves freely.
4-inch lines it up? Yeah, I do that.
And then tighten these down
She's a
and make sure that this thing still moves freely. That'll facilitate the leveling process later, because when the top is on and you do the finish leveling, the hand tools that you use under the skirts or the blinds, aprons, they go by different names, but you will have a small turn to make, so you want to minimize the number of turns you need to make to level the slates.
All right, well, since the last segment of the video, we've set the slates on the table. And when we set the slate on the table, we lined up the slate rail bolt holes with the holes that are in the frame of the table, and then tried to center it on the table as well as we could by peeling the edge of the slate and the wood that it's sitting on. Now, with the diamond table, this is where we really deviate a lot from everybody else. This is unbacked slate, and the slate is resting on the leveling system that you saw us put together in the previous segment. And so we're raising the slate up from underneath, which puts a lot of stress on the seams. So in order to prevent or mitigate the possibility of having a seam pop later when we're leveling the table, we actually are going to super glue the slates together. Now, in order to get the glue to go down in between the slates, we use paper. Now, I use drywall tape. You can use paper towel, toilet tissue, business cards. I like this because it's 2 inches wide. It's got a seam in the middle, and I can just drop it down in the slate. Fold another one, drop it down, and that forms a little tray that I can put the super glue into after I shim the slate and make sure that the seam is flush. So initially, I'm just going to put the drywall tape in there and push the slates together all the way, then go around and confirm that all the rail bolt holes are still lined up with the frame holes. Because once you glue it, then it's pretty hard to move it. But each piece of the slate is 260 or 270 pounds, so we've got over 700 pounds of slate. You don't really want to mess with that if you got it in place. Now, the diamond slates, it's hard to see in the video, but there's a crayon mark that goes in a big arc around this way. And, you know, the idea is to line up those index marks. And, you know, theoretically, that's the way the slate was cut, and that makes it easier, you know, to seam the slate. Now, something that a lot of people make a mistake with on this table, because we've made this table for 30 years, the slates are drilled for some of the older versions of this table. So you have these countersunk holes here for the traditional slate screws that will go into the frame of the table. And in that scenario, you'd be shimming between the slate and the frame, and then you'd be tightening those screws down. This is made for the slate to float on the leveling system, so those screws actually work against you when you go to level it. So you don't ever put slate screws in this table if it's sitting on the leveling system itself. Some of the newer slates, you know, we drill in countersink holes out here. They're right in the center, so we can drill a hole through the timber strand, drop a bolt through there. And if we had a slate that was like this, with the bolt dropped in there, I can hold the center of the table, and I can raise the outside wedges and the outside wedges, and I can bend a crown out of the table. So that's something that relatively recently that we've adopted on this table. This is a much older table, so it doesn't have those holes drilled in the slate. Low viscosity super glue, it's about the viscosity of water. So, and the paper is to act like a wick, so that when the glue hits that and it's real thin, the paper draws it down, and we're actually gluing the faces of the slate together. So initially, I just got to get this where everything's all flushed up, and then there's a step between the slates, so it's This slate's higher than this slate, and this slate's higher than this slate a little bit. So for this part of it, I use an impactor and a 3/8 inch nut driver and the machinist level. And I'm just using it as a straight edge to feel that the seam is flush. So when I run my level over here, you'll hear it click when it goes. I click, that was the step. Right over here, here's the step, right? So there's a wedge right here. And I like using a better as well. Okay. So the seams are basically flush now. Now before I go and glue anything together, the first goal was to get all three pieces so they're on the same geometric plane with each other. Then I want to go to the legs and measure this slate. And it's actually within 3 or 4 thousandths of being level. It's just a little bit low this way. And it's a little bit low in the middle. But before I glue the slate together, I want to make sure there's not a serious issue with leveling. Because once I glue them together, then it's a lot harder to fix that problem.
didn't realize it was like 6'6". It's huge.
Yeah, bring the car this morning, how it is.
Okay. Let's see what it looks like.
I talked to a guy last night, he was talking about that great caliber, and he said it takes so much to get out there. He said it's actually down in the
It's a big rail.
And he said, yeah, gosh, I was worried.
We're still rolling?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When we're leveling slate, one of the more misunderstood parts about slate is that it's flexible. So when we're leveling it, we're actually bending it a little bit. And so that's why the frame is really important, because if the frame is not square and true, you set the slate on there, eventually the slate's going to conform to the shape of the slate of the frame, and it's not going to be square or true either. So the frame is really important, and then, you know, getting the slate so that it's well supported everywhere and when we finish, so that it has no place to move to, so that once we get it level, it's going to stay level. Now, at this point, you know, this seam is relatively flush, except for a part that's right here that I don't like very much. And actually, just my body weight, if I kneel right here, this will come down enough that I could put the glue in there and wait for it to dry, and then it'll go away. I've seen some guys take a shipping strap and strap around the frame of the table and put a bottle jack here and just jack the jack, and it's pushing the jack on the table and put some pressure on there, and then you can flush up the slate that way. And this glue, if you get where the paper is pulling the glue down in between the slates, when you're all finished, a really strong person could go to the end of the table, pick up the end slate, and all three pieces pick up together like one, which is what we want. We want it so strong that when we go to level it with the wedges underneath, that we're not going to pop the seams apart. And that's the goal. Now give that a few minutes to set up, and then we'll take our floor scraper with a razor blade and just shear all that stuff off, and then do the same thing with the other seam, and then we're ready to finish the rest of the seam. This is just to keep the slates from popping apart later, and then we don't want to leave these seams exposed because the edge of the slate is relatively sharp, and the ball rolling across it will damage the cloth eventually. So, you know, we fill in the crack. Now we fill in the crack with Bondo because it's hard, it doesn't shrink, And with the paper in between there, we've left, you know, probably a 32nd of an inch gap between the slates. And if you use something like beeswax, which works really well and it's really fast and easy to apply, but the beeswax, when it gets warm, is viscous and it'll ooze down to the crack, and then you'll expose the crack. So if you go back, you know, a couple years later when you recover the table, you take the cloth off, you'll find the beeswax has oozed down the crack. With the Bondo, you don't have to worry about that. So I use Bondo even though it takes longer because you have to put it on, wait for it to dry, sand it, put another application on, wait for it to dry, sand it, and that takes probably an hour and a half. So most people aren't willing to do that, but I'm looking at it from the point of view I want something that's going to be permanent, and the beeswax is definitely not permanent. So well, that's my opinion. You could talk to 100 mechanics and you're going to get probably 5 or 6 different opinions on that particular topic. And there's people that use other things besides Bondo and beeswax. But you know, I'm not going to argue about the what's the best thing to use. I'm going to use Bondo, and somebody got to do some really serious talking to convince me to change. So, but now I just got to wait for that to dry and I can trim it off, and then, you know, we're done with the seaming part of it until we get to the Bondo.
So at this point, we're ready to attach the cloth to the slate with the contact equipment. The last thing you want to do is clean the bottom of the cloth and the top of the slate of anything that might be on it. So we whisk the slate off, and now we want to whisk the cloth off as well, like this. Alright, shake it. And then lift it up so that the cloth doesn't touch the slate or the wood. Fold it in half. Now we examine the cloth for any fibers or little small pieces of wood. If you can see it, touch it and see if you can feel it. Because if you can feel it, a ball rolling over it will deviate the path of a ball. If you can feel it with your finger, the ball will feel it too. And also, I'm also going to look at the slate for any maybe a Bondo or small pieces of wood, super glue, anything stuck to the slate that has any thickness. I want to see if I can scrape it off. There could be contact cement near a pocket that's unwanted. If you can feel it, so can the ball. So this side looks good. Let's flip it over, hold the middle, just roll it over like this. Same thing on this side. And we did leave a little bit. There's some things we got to take off, make sure there's nothing of any thickness under the cloth. And I always like to remove this loose threads so it doesn't roll up in my glue roller. Okay, roll this out. Leave this up on the slate. Just hold it there and leave it where it is. And just flop that over. That's good. So I'm getting ready to put the bed cloth on the slate. I use trays and tray liners for this contact cement because I don't like to clean up the mess. You can use cardboard on the floor if you're not going to make a mess on the floor. I use a paint roller with a 4-inch roller pad, and it's pretty common. I don't get to the specialty paint stores. I just get them from hardware stores and super centers, but I don't go to the specialty paint stops, so I don't really specify any particular thickness of. I've experimented with a few, but I don't really care. This is the contact cement that we use. This is a King Cobra glue. I want to show how I get the new cans open without making a mess. So I just take a screw and a screwdriver, and I thing open with no problem. But the gluing is time sensitive, so I kind of want to get all my ducks in a row before I get into it. Once you're satisfied that the cloth is clean and the slate is clean, and then you can lay it out. I usually start with the side of the Simonis cloth that has the seam on it, and I start by pulling that cloth over the edge of the slate and down to the edge of the slate, because the object here is we're going to use this contact cement method, and we're not going to put any, we don't want any glue building up on the top of the slate, which would, you know, theoretically over time build up under the rail and raise the nose height of the cushion. If the nose was higher, the ball bouncing off the nose would be slower. We like a fast, that's what makes a diamond table, sets it apart. You want a table to be fast, and there's an exact specification. The number slips my mind. So I've got that part of the cloth laid out. It's a safety knife. I took the blade out, and I'm going to use that to score a mark visible through the cloth on the bottom. So with the cloth just laying in place, the score mark will be visible on the bottom side. And that will give me a place to look at and start to decide where to put the glue. Line this out. So I want to lay the cloth out parallel to the edge of the slate, within a half an inch. So once it's pretty straight, this is the cool part. So that score mark is visible, and I want to overlap the score mark with the seam by some amount. The amount is going to depend on a few things. The type of cloth you're using. So for a 9-foot table, I laid the cloth out, and I'm going to overlap that score mark by an inch or so. And where I want to apply the glue, I begin at the side pocket, and I want to put some glue right here, and I'm just putting glue on an inch of this side, which is going to be laid down first. I'm waiting for this to dry a little bit. It doesn't take long, 90 seconds or so, 3 minutes or so. And if it looks wet because it's dark, and if it looks wet or feels wet, that's because it's wet. It should be tacky. It should feel sticky. That's when it's tacking up and drying enough. And there's not enough tack. It's dry enough to put more glue, but there's not enough tackiness for the adhesion that I want. I do wait for the glue to dry before I put more on the cloth. You can see the color change. So I started from one direction, and second application I went in the reverse direction, and with hopefully the final application I'm going to start from the middle and go to the pockets. We'll let that tack up a few minutes. The slate feels good and tacky and not wet. It has enough glue on it, and then when this becomes dry enough, I should be able to stretch the cloth on at that point. Glue on here, it's good and tacky, and I'm ready to stretch it on here and start sticking it down. Now, I start at the side pocket, and I'm sticking down an inch. I'm using this knife, and I'm really applying some contact pressure there. I want to put some pocket relief. I started I left about a little over an inch on this side. That's the side I wanted to start with. And I left a little bit more hanging off this side. Here, I want to pull just over an inch and a quarter in, so that I should have 9/16 of an inch of pocket relief in the pocket, because that's how you get the grain. When we stretch this, we want to end up with the grain being straight, even despite the fact it's going across the side pocket. Because, as you'll see, to avoid the stress concentrations that result from just the way stretching it naturally. Now, my first stretch, I stretch it maybe 75% intensity, approximately 2 inches this way, but not as hard as I can pull. I want to pull harder later. I'm going to have to pull harder later. Now, for this part, I want to visually look where the glue is, and it is 2.5 or 3 inches. It's closer to 3 inches what I have to stretch. I started on the same side to begin with. Stick it on there about 2 inches. Take up all the slack out of here. And work my fingers right over the vertical edge of the side pocket. And I want to stretch pocket relief by 9/16 of an inch. That pocket relief I speak of is this slack that's causing these wrinkles, which I'll stretch out. If you're new to the gluing method, it's always good at this point to look and see that you've waited enough time and you're not pulling the cloth loose before you make a second pull. Now, this pull, I'm pulling in 2 directions. I'm primarily pulling this way, but I'm also pulling this way. I'm using another kind of specialized tool. This is a Slate Master, slatemaster.com, but they're basically carpet pliers or duckbill pliers with kind of these teeth in here and a leverage tab. So I really like these the best. And I really want to pull real hard. I want to pull up and over. I don't want to drag the glue over this edge. I really want to quickly stretch up and pull down. And this tool really saves my skin. I can do this, you don't need these, but it'll save your skin, especially if you don't have the calluses built up yet. I'm using 2 indicators as I stretch the cloth. I'm using the score mark that I made initially. And also, I'm looking at the grain in the cloth. The dye leaves little kind of stripes and lines that you can see. They won't really come up on camera, but I'm trying, as I'm doing this, I'm pulling straight across from the side pocket. As I go to the corner pocket, I'm pulling more towards the corner pocket. So I'm stretching the cloth in 2 directions as I progress, and trying to keep that grain straight. I'm going to apply glue to the bottom of the slate and to the edge of the slate, and then I'm going to do to the sides of the pocket, and then to the center of the side pocket. I'm going to do the same on the other side. I'm letting that glue dry, same with over here. This glue is drying, so that I'm going to just try to save time. See where this line of grain is and guess how much I have to stretch it. Really not guessing, but stick that there, and I'm trying to get that all these grain lines straight and minimize stress concentration. I'm trying to minimize the appearance of stretch rays, as they especially appear under better light. So after I kind of started to stick down the top of the cloth to the top of the pocket, I know more precisely how much I can trim it. And then I'll pull down and apply finger pressure. And I'm really it should be a pretty good challenge if I've done my stretching well. Okay, sweet, come around me. So the result that I'm trying to get is straight lines as possible. Yeah. And I'm happy with that. I've stuck the side pockets down. I'm going to start with this first edge. It's good and tacky. I want to look how far I have to stretch it. You'll be able to see the knife move by how much I stretch the cloth. Again, as I begin, the first pull was straight this way, and as I work towards the corner pockets, I'm really pulling in 2 directions towards the corner pocket as well. at this point I've stretched most of the cloth. This is all I have left to stretch. You can see when I stretched that, just even that last pull that I made, because at first this cloth was folded straight across. Now it kind of makes an arc. So it, but I'm pulling for the fences here. This is really when you got to pull the rest of the slack out. The home stretch. At that point, I pre-trimmed the corner pockets much like I did the side pockets. Here's the pocket finisher. You just put glue on the cloth, gave it some time to dry, and I just cut it like I do the pockets. Cut in the middle, and 2 cuts on each side. So I'm cutting them into thirds, approximately equal thirds, so that what I can do is stretch these down and out. And that's what makes them look like that. And a pocket finisher for this. And I'm ready to trim the cloth off. I managed to get a 2 3/4 inch stretch from the edge of the slate to the score mark that I made initially. And I want to make sure that I trimmed off the cloth and I can expose the leveling wedges in case they come out, because they may need to be raised by that much. Alright. And then I'm ready to trim holes in the slate for the slate bolts. Okay. So typically 9-foot slates these days have 4 of these holes. Slate bolt holes per section. They are a little oversized, and you can cut holes in them like that. You may find a masonry tool like a rotary grinder, and you could just take a power drill, and if you have one that's the right diameter, you could just grind the cloth off, or you might even just cut it in little pluses like this. That's probably good enough to get a slate bolt through, or you could do hexagonal if you want to do it that way. Whatever's clever. Anyway, just so you can get a slate bolt through the top. So some people don't know what these pocket finishers are for. I'm going to put cloth on them and make them look like this, and they are placed under the pockets, under that part of the slate, and that's what you attach the actual pocket basket to, the nylon baskets. So they're kind of strapped in place with wood screws and these little straps, and so they're just mounted here, and because they're wood, they give something to attach the pockets to. So I just cut strips out, and I'm going to glue those and make these into these. I want to locate this pocket finisher this way, and there's a couple of considerations. Here is the strap. It's a little piece of aluminum, and there's a couple things that's going to go right here too. Also the rail bolts, you can see a star washer that's been tightened down there before. So you want to put it in a place where it doesn't interfere with the star washer, and it leaves room in the wood to screw the pockets to. So I like to kind of put them this way, like this. You could see, if it was just wood, you could see wood right under the pocket. But we put the cloth on there, so it's visually more appealing. Alright, so some of the tools that I use for assembling the top and stapling the rail cloth on that come in handy. Of course, a rubber mallet for pockets, putting the pockets in. Kind of a ball peen hammer for tapping down broken staples. The parts that are too little to grab and pull out, you just tap them down. Diagonal cutters for electrical wire, good for pulling staples. These are actually staple removers. This is a common kind you can get most anywhere. It looks like a nail puller. And then this is something a little more specialized you can get from maybe like a flooring place or a cobbler. Tailor shears for fabric, very, very sharp, crucial. Rectangular razor blades. And like a safety sleeve, I always use those. And then these are the fasteners for the corners. And the professional one's got this round corner block, and these are called tight joint fasteners. It's a cabinet hardware. There's 3 of them. You've got the one with the holes in it on one side that goes on one end of the threaded rod, and then on a professional, it just pulls against this other thing, and you tighten it down and it'll pull apart and draw these together. And then I use a center punch, like a nail punch. It's a pin punch. It's 1/8 inch diameter, and that will be able to turn these tight joint fasteners and tighten them. This is just a piece of wood covered in cloth. It just comes in handy for tapping the feather strips down after I staple the rail cloth on to make sure that it's tapped all the way down, but it protects the rail cloth from the hammer itself. And then diamond, we recommend 1/2 inch crown, 1/4 inch leg, 20 gauge staples, and of course then the last thing, a staple gun, whatever kind of staple gun you use, if it's pneumatic or electric, it doesn't matter, just as long as it uses the right staples. Smaller staples are no good, and anyway, that's the appropriate one. So on this style of professional top with the round corner blocks, I'm using these 3-piece cabinet joints. I put the tight joint fastener in first and hold it in place with a punch. I would. It'll hold still for me. And then you can start the rod into the tight joint fastener this way. Get it turned in there. Bring these together. Make sure that there's a couple of styles. There's an older style that's used on some of the hardwood tops. Like this is rosewood. Honduras rosewood. There's either a plastic biscuit or there's two dowel rods that go this way, in that direction. And bring them together, and then put that other piece in there, and then you can turn it just until it's started and tight. And that's the one style. If it has an angular corner block, then typically the short rail sections will be shipped from Diamond with the rod already sticking out, and you'll just have to drop the tight joint fastener in there first and push the whole short rail in, and then you won't have this piece. It won't be visible, so you'll just have to try to turn that. But on this style, this is actually the easier of the two. So a couple of things that I keep in mind when I'm doing this. Number one, this can be done on the floor. I'm doing it on sawhorses today, but it can be done on the floor as well. Diamond ships the pieces in foam, and I leave the pieces on the floor. If it's on the floor, I'll leave these pieces on top of the foam so to protect the wood from the floor and the cloth from, say, pet fur and dust and stuff like that. I'm trying to keep the four pieces of the top in one plane as I tighten them down. A couple other things about these I take for granted, but when you join corners, the table pieces are marked A, B, C, and D. And so, keeping the letters together, that's important, but it can be omitted. And make sure that these dowel rods are in there. And if you do this you can do it on the floor, you can do it on sawhorses, you can do it on the pool table with cloth on it if you're careful. If you do it on the floor, I put the rubber mallet under each corner while I'm putting the pockets in there. And then just the key point, just make sure these are tight. Don't break this off. Don't use a nail punch with a conical taper. It will destroy the tight joint fastener, the cabinet joint. Well, now I'm going to begin the process of stapling rail cloth to the top. These are the feather strips. These are wooden. Diamond now uses like a plastic, rubbery type foam, different product now. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and trim these off to length. And I want to follow the angle of the side pocket, mark the center, and then mark the angle on here that I'm going to cut. And then I don't cut straight up and down. I try to follow the angle of the pocket facing. And then I trim off a little bit of the sharp corner. Now, make sure that the length is good, and that it doesn't leave any bulges in the pocket face, the rubber pocket face. I don't want it to stick out, and I don't want there to be an air gap that will let the cloth be loose. And then I'm going to go around and do all 6 of these like that and be right back. The pieces should be about 6 inches wide or big enough to cover this top, and that'll give it enough length to wrap around the cushion. Now, Simona's cloth, if you cut it, I've notched this 6 inches wide, and I don't know about any other cloth, but Simona's you can do this. Simona's you can tear the cloth, and it tears in a straight line because it's so perfect. And we'll get these pieces cut, and then the piece with the seam on it, I use, by convention, I do this at the top and the bottom of the table, or the head and the foot, so that there's Simona's puts a maker's mark on there, so a player that's breaking can see when they step to the table for sure. They can see that it's Simona's. It says right there. And so this is long enough that when I put these pieces in half, I'm cutting them off to the same length, and then they're long enough to go across the pockets. And let's get rid of this little threads. And so I put the seam away from the center of the table, and I put the edge of the cloth and line it up in this direction with the hole that the pocket screw goes into, the second hole. Get the feather strip in the feather strip groove. I've got little marks lined down here for the center marks, and then just tap them in a little bit to start them, and make sure that they still fit well, and there's no air gaps and they're not too long. And I'm going to go around and tap those down. All right, I'm going to show you how to put the cloth on the top. And now about the cloth, these pieces I'm cutting, or I'm actually going to tear them, are 6 inches wider. They should be long enough on a diamond table to go from the nose of the cushion where it's rubber to about the end of the top. And on a diamond top, because of its width, that's as long as it takes to wrap around it. But it should be about 6 inches wide. So I'm back finishing the next step of this thing. So anyway, I got the 6 inches of cloth cut and tapped down all around it. I've got there's two sides of this, you know, the playing surface side and the bottom. I've got right now the bottom up, so you know, when I wrap it around the playing surfaces, the smooth side is the one that's visible. And I put the cloth to the rubber on this in this direction, and then in this direction to the second slate pocket screw hole. And then I want to go ahead and pull the cloth a good 1.5 inches this way. And then as I'm tapping this feather strip down, I'm not tapping it down all the way. I want to be able to put my thumbnail and run along there, because basically I'm going to trim that off eventually with this razor blade. So I want to leave enough of the feather strip sticking up to make a cutting edge, because you want to be careful as you do cut this not to cut through and cut the rail cloth on the other side. It's pretty easy to do that. Same thing on the other side. I start in the corner pockets and go to the side. And same thing, about 1.5 inch pull. Good stretch in that lengthwise direction. And not tapping the feather strip all the way down. Make sure there's a good cutting edge there. And go around like that. Not too difficult. And that's all until I get ready to trim it off. So I'm ready to trim this off now. I'll show you how to do that. That feather strip created a little backstop to make this cutting edge. Be careful when you're cutting this, and don't do it too quickly, especially if you're new. Have extra cloth, and I've got my hand braced real steadily so that what I don't want to do, the worst thing you can do is let the blade slip through, and it only has to go the width of that feather strip before it cuts that cloth, and you've got a bigger problem to clean up. And that may cost you some cloth. So you can only do about half of that before you got to turn around and come back the other side. I'm showing you one way that's field expedient method when I've got this whole top assembled, or if you're doing a recovery, you could do it this way. Other people, if you're doing it by yourself, if you don't have a person to help you flip it over, or if you're doing like Diamond at the plant, they cover all these, they staple all the rail cloth to each rail section individually before the top is assembled. But I generally work with a partner in the field and get my partner to help me flip the entire top over so I can work inside the ring, as I say. And then, so what I'm doing, it's going to get folded under and stapled. That's about what I wanted to cut off. So the first side, I laid it there to that second pocket screw hole. And this side, I trimmed it off there. So I just followed the line this way roughly, and folded the cloth there at that line and cut it. And then I just got to do that for I'll show you how much of the side pocket to trim off. So in the side pocket, I just want to, from the middle of the side pocket, probably about halfway between the middle and the pocket facing. So that's to overlap. So about that much. And well, let's finish this cut. Get this cut out that far. Make that fold one more time. All right. And likewise all the way around. A little bit sloppy, but good enough. And you can see what I left. Now I've just got to tap that down with something like this. I've got this wooden block I showed earlier. You might have seen one of these, but it's just so that I'm not hammering the wood directly. This cloth covers it up. It doesn't really hurt the wood finish. Too much stress on the cloth. And I'm running my finger over that to make sure it feels that it's flush all the way down. If I miss this spot, I'll just go back to that spot and a couple more taps, and then proceed that way. So once you've got the cloth all trimmed down and the feather strips all tapped down flush, you make sure that the underside of the cloth is clean. There's no wood particles or anything of thickness underneath the cloth before you staple it down. The last thing I do is kind of like an insurance policy. Kind of as a little assurance, a little extra insurance. I'm going to put one staple through the cloth and the feather strip where the pocket goes. I'm going to do that all the way around. So 12 of these real quick. I'm just being careful. I know where my staple gun puts the staple, and that'll help the cloth, assure that the cloth doesn't pull out. One thing you do when you stretch the rail cloth on there is what you don't want to happen is that the cloth to pull loose from underneath the feather strip and expose the feather strip. So in practice, I put a staple in the feather strip to make sure that never happens. And then we'll be ready to flip this over and staple the rest. So to begin to staple the rail cloth, I put my finger on the very edge of the feather strip, the end of it. So when I'm mostly pulling the cloth in the direction that the cushion is. I don't really want to stretch the cloth around the cushion so much because it is soft rubber and it can be deformed easily, and you don't want to cause any kind of waves in the nose of the cushion. But I do want to give it a good stretch along the direction of the nose of the cushion. And I make the first hold on these pocket facings pretty tight perpendicular to the pocket facing, making sure that all four of the corners are visible and printed clearly by the cloth, so that meaning that you've got good tension on all four corners. I put one staple just, I don't want to put it in the rubber pocket facing, but in the wood, and then I'm folding the cloth under, and then it's designed to allow the pocket to still go in there. Now I want to put the staple gun in there and make sure I don't put the staple through either of the pocket screw holes on this side. And as a general rule of thumb, I try to staple perpendicular to the direction of pull. If I'm stretching the cloth this way to take out slack, I pull it this way. I want my staple, it has the most holding power in perpendicular to the direction of the pull. If you get any bad staples, you want to keep these things handy where you can reach them to pull them out. And don't release the cloth until you make sure that the staple that you put is holding well. And there's other ways to do this. This is the way in practice I've adopted to do. Now, I'm doing this short rail first, which is 2 oblique angles in the corner pockets. And if you were just to staple this across, there's a lot of loose cloth here, and kind of a hallmark of substandard work, if you don't find a way to pull out all that slack when you go to staple this up, you'll see wrinkles form in the last several inches of the nose of the cushion, or you'll see wrinkles on the pocket facing. I'm trying to avoid both of those. And so what I do is each time I pull this way, I also pull this way a little bit too. I fold the cloth over, and those wrinkles are going in the top. or in the bottom of the cloth that would be underneath the rail. Diamond rails have this piece of this cut of wood, so the part of the rail that you staple the cloth to is recessed, and it's not actually, the staples shouldn't actually protrude above that, which would allow them to touch the cloth on the bed. You don't want them to touch the cloth on the bed. So same thing on this side. I'm pulling towards the corner. Good tight pull. Make sure that's good and holds. Trying to get in close. I'll show you where I'm stapling. You can see the recessed cut, and I'm pulling over in this way and just giving a little overlap. And that's where the wrinkles go. That extra cloth is going to go on the bottom under there. This is one way I found to get rid of this. So this should be tight where you shouldn't be able to get your fingers under it, and then you can. You want to put these, halfway and somewhat close together, and making my pulls and staples this way, evenly spaced. So at this point, what I do, I'm feeling for any loose, but double checking to see if there's any looseness in the cloth. But that's an end rail. I'm going to do the side rail. It's a little bit different because you've got the oblique angle for the corner pocket, but more of a 90-degree angle nearly. It's like 101 for the side pocket. Same thing, I'm keeping my finger under there, pulling this in this direction, make a good wrap. You're making sure that I see all four corners pretty well, and then I just want to miss the rubber pocket facing, and I put that staple pretty far up there, leaving a little room for another one.
I'll be there this time. It's like,
Here,
he's got like 3 or 4 guys.
good and tight. Try to get my staple gun in there.
Now the guys that do show up know what they're doing. Good work. Yeah, but they're always busy.
Okay, and then for the side pocket pull, same thing. I've got a little thread here. Pull that back. I'm pulling it in the direction of the nose of the cushion. A little bit of tension this way, not so much. And same thing. Make sure I put that staple where it's not going to hit the rubber pocket facing. And this fold is pretty critical. Yes. What I'm trying to do is make a horizontal line in my mind, and I want this angle that this forms with the horizontal and mirror that with this bottom. And then what we're trying to do is make this fold. People are going to put more staples in there than I will, but that's okay. I use this tool, try to sharpen this crease in this fold. And whatever you do, you want to try to make each side pocket the same, like mirror twins, consistency sakes. And put this staple as low as I can, and put this staple as high as I can. And pull this there. And one staple here. This staple goes right here so that when I trim the cloth later, it would stop a cut from propagating in that direction. So this staple, I want to put the middle of the staple right in the middle of that wood. And then this should be same thing, tight enough that you can barely get your fingers through it. And similarly with the end rail, the length of the rail, you just want everything consistent.
Get all the stuff out of the huge event too, you know.
Yeah, get all the stuff off the base.
I mean, I'm before that. All the stuff that you go over to the March Nationals.
Right.
You have to replace several of these staples.
Since they moved the date, they'll change all that. Have to be, you don't, the BCA is different than the other leagues. You don't have to do anything other than be a sanctioned player in a league. You don't have to win anything, you don't have to do anything, and you just register and go play in the nationals. So, and the local leagues are run completely different than the nationals. They might have a handicapping system.
Good on
And the
that.
nationals, everybody.
And I'll just remove and replace a few of the staples that kind of buckled. And then eventually I would trim off any of the cloth that goes
Everybody should go play.
like here. So we're attaching this pockets, okay? And these pockets consist of these aluminum inserts and 4 holes, and there's 4 of them, okay? Corners and sides are different. You know, the corners have these, there are 2 different types. But I use a drill with a light in it, and I want to try to line at least 2 of them up. Because the new pockets, I just start that one, start this one, so that they don't back out when I go to put these 2 in. A lot of times it would just pull the other 2 inserts out. So that's how I proceed. They're a good fit first when they're new. Go back down with it. New PVC, because that's what they are. PVC, you know, vinyl, and then there's leather and these nylon. But the new pockets like these can be a little more of a challenge. Might have to soften the vinyl a little bit like this. Okay, I didn't want to have to do that, but these are difficult. Try my patience today. Now, the one thing you don't want to do, you don't want to over tighten the screw. You want, as soon as the screw draws down to the washer, that's probably as tight as you want it, because the inserts are fairly easy to strip out. They're somewhat fragile. You can break a screw off in the insert because they are fairly small screws. They're like 1/8" screws. They're pretty small. And what you want to do is try to get the front of the pocket down, and it's normal for the back of the pocket to be a little higher because, you know, this part of the pocket is designed to be higher. It pushes the ball down when you shoot it. That's what pushes the ball down. So it's normal for the back to be a little higher, but you try to want to get the front of the pockets kind of down flush with the wood. So let's see. next on a professional are the corner blocks. These round corner blocks, they do have letters, as you know, C, B, D, and A, or A and D. Yeah. So anyway, they've got these long bolts to put them in. Start those. Go for the corner blocks. All right, we're ready to put the assembled top on the table. So let's flip it here. Put the edge down on the floor. Tip it up. And on a professional, the blinds are angled in pretty well, so don't smash your fingers. But after you lift the top, you want to work your fingers down, out, and then look at the side pockets. Come to me and get that side pocket closer to the camera in. That hurt. And then get the other side pocket basically in. Seat it down. Make sure that there aren't any leather tucked under. And then start to center the top.
Okay, now, the top is bigger than the slate, and the slate bolts, holes in the slate are bigger than the bolts by a lot. So we try to get the pockets centered to the rails, and then we want to center the ends, and you can put your fingers underneath the cushion, and there's a little void on both sides, and you can feel it with your fingertips, and you just move it side to side until it's centered on the table. Otherwise, the table could be canted slightly, and one pocket, the pocket drop for the slate is not going to be lined up with the pocket opening. And you can make that pocket really difficult, and then another pocket will be easier because you're kind of canting it open. And get it nice and centered. One thing that's different about diamond 9-foots is there's 4 rail bolts per rail. Typically, in the industry, it's 3 per rail. So we've got everything lined up properly, getting it centered on here, and we should be able to get these rail bolts started.
And the head has the maker's mark. The trademark by convention we locate at the head of the table.
Also known as the bracket break into the table.
And once I have the 2 ends fastened down, I want to take one look at the long rail and make sure that the nose of the cushion on each side of the side pocket is in one line, and whether or not I have to push it in or pull it out before I bolt it down. This one was straight, but they may need a little adjustment.
Well, we've got the table fully assembled now, and what's remaining is to level the table. And we made a video of this previously, and you just look up on YouTube, diamond pool table leveling. It should be the first thing up, and it's a comprehensive video on how to level the table. Now, when we built this table, if you've watched the whole video, this is a 3-piece slate, and we super glued the slates together. So essentially, we made it into a 1-piece slate. So the leveling is very similar to what we showed in that other video. The biggest difference, the other video was a Pro-Am, this is a professional, and the skirts angle in so sharply that it's a little tougher to get to the adjusters. So I somewhat leveled it before we put the top on there, but the top weighs quite a bit. This one weighs around 200 pounds, and then we run rail bolts up through there, and we're clamping the top down against the frame of the table, which draws the slate down. So we know it's going to change when we put it on there. That was the whole point of the leveling system, is that all that weight and force can be in place, and then we can level the table. Because before, you had to level the table before you put the cloth on there, and that was pretty much it. And then whatever you got when you bolted the top on is what you got, because you were going to, likely to break the seams apart. Plus, there were slate screws that were going through the slate into the frame of the table, fixing the slate in place where it can't move. And so there's very little adjusting you could do after the fact. So the level in this table, you've got, the 18 leveling wedges around the edge of the table, and you've got the, the 4 in the middle, and then you've got the feet. And when we get finished, and everything's all level and everything's good, those set screws that are in the feet that we showed right at the very beginning of the video, we're going to snug all those down, because if you were to pick this table up to move it a little bit, you could pick it right up out of the foot, then you'd kind of have a problem. So, that's, you want to make sure that you tighten those set screws down, so that if somebody does pick the table up later to move it, that they're not going to lose a foot on the table and then have to hold it up in the air, get the foot back on there, and put the set screw in, after the fact. So, anyway, it's really difficult to film leveling the table without having a camera right over the machinist level, and you can't see it like we did in the other video, because we did it without the cloth, and we used the slate like a chalkboard and wrote measurements directly on the slate, so it was a little easier to visualize what I was doing leveling the table, but the procedure is the same. That's it.